This is the Lockpicking Lawyer, and what I have for you today is a really interesting lock that was sent to me by Richard in the UK. This is a cylinder from a Banham M2002 mortise lock. Now at first blush this looks like a high pin count dimple cylinder, but in fact this is something totally unique. You see, there's no driver pins in this lock at all. There's just horizontally opposed key pins that can actually slide in and out of the core. If we look carefully at this key, you can see that it's filled with holes, and that allows the horizontally opposed pins to touch each other even when the key is inserted. Let me explain to you why that's important. Each set of horizontally opposed pins touch in the center of the lock, and the total length of those two pins is equal to the width of this cylinder. So if one of those pins is over too far to either side, the back end of the pin will stick out of the core and keep the core from turning. And there's actually spooling on the back end of each of those pins. So when you insert the key, what that does is move the center point or the touch point of those two pins either left or right, such that all of the pins are retracted and inside of the core. What it also means is if you try to stick a pick in between those two pins, it's probably going to push one or both of them out of the core and seize the lock up. So that creates some challenges for picking when you can't even put a pick on the pin. So as I do whenever I look at any sort of new unusual lock, the first thing I did was took this apart. And I was very, very impressed with the tolerances between the core and the outer lock housing. In fact, it was so tight that I had a difficult time even getting a shim in between there. And that's important because, as it turns out, there is no lip, and you could probably shim this from the front if you had a shim that was thin enough. But the tolerance didn't allow me to shim it with the, I guess, relatively thick 5,000 shims that I have. However, what I was not impressed with were the tolerances of the pins within the core. It was actually pretty loose. And it occurred to me that we probably could rake this with a very, very unique raking method. And here's what we're going to do. I'm going to be putting really, really light tension on here. And as you can see, if I turn it a little bit, this core turns to a certain point and then it stops. And it's turning so much, and that probably means that we're in some of the spooling on the sides of those pins. So what I'm going to be doing is alternating between light and super light tension as I am raking this. And also sometimes during the raking, I am going to use the rake to counter rotate this manually to allow some of those spooling or some of the spooling on the ends of the pins to set. And it turns out I can consistently rake this relatively quickly, which was a big surprise because these locks have a reputation for being very high security. So let's see what we can do here. As you can see, I'm tilting a little bit to get some counter rotation in there, and just trying to keep my rake on the tops of the pins rather than getting in between them and seizing the lock up. And there we go. As you can see, we open that up relatively quickly. Now, if I turn this 180 degrees, I am going to relock this. However, if I use a plug spinner, I can go the full 360 degrees and it will not be an issue. So let me get my plug spinner set up, and as you can see, we just went 360 degrees. So actually unlocking this would not be an issue. Once you have it picked, a plug spinner will do the rest. So let's take this guy apart and I will show you this really unique locking mechanism. To take this apart, what I'm going to need to first do is remove 2 Allen screws on either side of this, and I believe they're 2mm Allen screws. And after we do that, the entire core should come out. I've already removed this piece from the back, so I should be able to take this apart relatively easily. The only thing that holds that cylinder in, other than the pins, is this little metal piece right here, which I can get out pretty easily. And now, once I put the key in, I should be able to take it apart. Now, I am going to zoom in as we open the first cylinder so you can take a look at this. Okay, you can see a little ring that goes around the pin right here. That ring is for holding a spring in place. So you're not going to be able to see this as I take it apart because I'm going to be covering up with my fingers, but that's what we have right there. So let me get to gutting this. And what I'll do is I will put our horizontally opposed pins right next to each other in my pinning tray. Uh-oh, I just lost one of those rings. Okay, there's the first pin. And here's the second one. Let me see if I can find that. Oh, there's the ring. Great. Okay, let's get the next set out. And I'm placing these pins as they would be set inside of the lock. With the tips toward each other. Okay, that's half of them so far. Okay, those are the two in chamber 4. Now we're on to 5. And here is the last set from chamber 6. Okay, let me give you a zoom in on all of this. Okay, if we take a careful look at these pins, you can see that many of the longer ones have spooling on the back end of them there to keep them locked in place if you try to tension the lock when one of those is sticking out the side of the core. But here we have all 6 sets of horizontally opposed pins. They touch in the middle, and when they do touch, they will not stick out the side of this cylinder. If they do stick out, they will go into these holes in the lock housing and prevent the core from turning. So a really interesting mechanism, one that I have never seen before, but it turns out that the tolerances of the pins within the core itself were relatively unimpressive, and it made it for a relatively easy rake on this. I'm not sure how hard this would be to single pin pick. It's probably what I'll work on next, but I wanted to show you this because I thought it was a relatively fast and efficient way to get into these locks. So that's all I have for you on this Banham lock. Richard, thank you very, very much for sending this unique lock my way. To everyone else, if you do have any questions or comments about it, please put them below. If you like this video and would like to see more like it, please subscribe. And as always, have a nice day. Thank you.